We just heard the Hollies with the theme song to the 1966 Peter Sellers comedy After the Fox, one of my favorites. Peter Sellers was a performer that I idolized growing up. His seemingly effortless ability to slip in and out of multiple characters, best exemplified by his three roles in Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, along with his wild sense of humor, led to him becoming a comedy icon. When I first discovered the BBC radio program he was involved in during the 1950s called The Goon Show, it was like discovering the missing link between the Marx Brothers and Monty Python. To this day, I think The Goon Show is the most anarchic radio comedy program ever made. Sellers is the subject of a new biography by our guest today, Dr. Andrew Norman. The book is called The Real Peter Sellers. Andrew, welcome to the show.
That's a pleasure, David.
Now, you've written biographies of historical figures like Winston Churchill and Charles Darwin, so what inspired you to look into the life of this most impenetrable personality?
Well, I think with all my biographies, there's got to be a question mark, and I'm trying to solve a conundrum. And what I was really interested in was, as the title of the book indicates, was there a real Peter Sellers, or was he just acting his whole life, you know?
Yeah, Peter Sellers famously said that he didn't have a real personality at all. He was just a cipher, if you like, for various different characters. And he said this in character, ironically, on The Muppet Show, right?
Yeah, 1978. On The Muppet Show
right.
in the US, he said, "There is no me, I do not exist." And then he asked if he could play the part of himself in a film. And he said, "No, I'd probably have little confidence in myself. I don't know what I am."
I know that people have latched on to that statement, saying that Peter Sellers had, a big identity crisis, and maybe that was why he allegedly was very difficult to work with.
Yes, that may be the case, but in the Goon shows, he absolutely adored spending his Sundays recording the Goon shows with Spike Milligan, Harry Seacombe, and Michael Benting. There's no way he was difficult to work with in those. Maybe some people found him difficult, yes. He was basically lacking in confidence. His parents were both in vaudeville. His father was a theatre pianist. His mother, they were both from working class Jewish family. And his father made the infamous remark to him that you'll never do any good. You'll only ever become a road sweeper. And I just think he had no confidence, and he just became paranoid. And, if your father says that to you, I mean, what do you expect,
Wow. Yeah, you mentioned the Goon Show and how much he loved working with those guys. And I do wonder, since I've also never read any bad word about Peter from Spike Milligan or Harry Seacombe and any of the things they wrote, I wonder if that was such a pleasurable experience because doing that kind of comedy on that kind of show was creatively fulfilling for Peter in a way that maybe some other projects weren't.
I think he longed to be amongst friends, and he loved those other three chaps. And I know people who've actually been to those Goon shows, and seen them in action, and he was never happier.
Alone in Paris, I went down to the notorious Café Tom, proprietor Maurice Ponk. I was looking for a man who might specialize in piano robberies from the Louvre.
Good evening. You are looking for a man who might specialize in piano robberies from the Louvre?
How do you know?
I was listening on the radio and I heard you say.
Good. Sit down.
No, thank you. I'm naked.
The only other time he seemed to be happy was when he was married to his first wife, Anne. In their garden, he was a great photographer, and he's taken a load of cine of him playing with his children, his son Michael and daughter Sarah. And he just looks so happy and relaxed. Whereas every other time you see him, he's either Dr. Strangelove or Inspector Clouseau. It's so funny, really. Yeah.
Do you have a particular favorite recording or performance from Peter Sellers?
I think when I was a young lad, my uncle gave me a couple of gramophone records. Songs for Swinging Sellers was one of them. And he's taking off what we call sort of stuffed shirts, people or institutions who think they're absolutely brilliant, like politicians, public schools, English seaside resorts, the aristocracy and so on. So that I really loved him when I heard that.
Tell me, what types of pupil do you have here?
We have two types of pupil, Class A and Class B. At meal times, the Class B boys get priority.
And the Class A boys?
They get food.
Yeah, that very early period of Peter's career is really good stuff. I like the Ealing comedies and the Bolting Brothers movies like Heavens Above. I just love that stuff.
They were absolutely marvelous. I mean, I still watch them now. I'm All Right, Jack, and the one where he's a trade unionist, and this is at a time when the trade unionists were all powerful in the UK. And Sellers comes home one day, working class family, and his wife, played by Irene Handel, she says, "What are you doing home at this time of day? It's lunchtime." And he says, "I'm on strike." And she says, "Well, if you're on strike, I'm on strike. I'm going home to Mum's." And she walks out and leaves him to do all the cooking. Absolutely marvelous. Very contemporary theme,
It is. And, during the 1960s, Peter had tremendous box office success with movies like What's New Pussycat, and, of course, the Pink Panther series starts up, and that just continues on into the 70s and right up until the time he died.
I first saw a Pink Panther film when I was up at Oxford, and I went with a friend to the local cinema, and I came out, my ribs aching with laughter. And I still find those films just as amusing today and brilliant. But I think the film being there was the one I found to be very profound and very moving.
Oh, I agree. I think it's the performance of his career. He manages to be just as funny as he was in a Pink Panther movie or any other movie that involved kind of a crazy extreme character. But here it's a much more nuanced performance, and it shows just the depth Peter Sellers had as an actor.
Yes, I mean, we come back to The Garden again. There he is acting the part of Chance the gardener, of whom nobody has any record. He's always been behind the four walls of the garden. And then suddenly his employer dies and he goes out into the outside world. And owing to a series of misunderstandings, people think he's an extremely important figure, and he's introduced to the president of the USA. Now, that humor would have appealed to Sellers absolutely enormously. So on the one hand, you've got a non-entity who's just happy in his garden, at peace, no pressure. On the other hand, you've got someone who's sort of regarded as a sort of a massive public figure.
In a garden, growth has its season. First comes spring and summer, but then we have fall and winter. And then we get spring and summer again.
I think what our insightful young friend is saying is that we welcome the inevitable seasons of nature, but we're upset by the seasons of our economy.
Yes, there will be growth in the spring.
Well, Mr. Garner, I must admit that is one of the most refreshing and optimistic statements I've heard in a very, very long time. I admire your good, solid sense. That's precisely what we lack on Capitol Hill.
I think Sellers was brilliant at playing a part, a brilliant mimic, a brilliant actor. But with being there, it's a sort of critique of the whole business of, you know, the gardener, content with his little life in the garden, and not ambitious, not materialistic in any way, suddenly going out and encountering this massively materialistic world where everybody's jumping over everybody else to try and get more and more and more stuff. You know, that's a terrific indictment of the way we live nowadays, I think. And I'm sure Sellers was aware of that. So that would be the one I would recommend. But watch the funny ones first. Have a really good time, a good laugh, and enjoy it. And I remember there was one where he was going around a chocolate factory, and and the chocolates were all coming off this machine, and he was eating them all up and then feeling really ill, you know. It's so funny.
No, there's a lot there. I mean, there's so much for people to explore and discover. So where can people go to get your book, The Real Peter Sellers?
Well, it's available on the publisher's website, Pen and Sword Books. It's available on Amazon and in all good bookshops, to use a cliche.
Well, I want to thank you so much for appearing on the show today. And books like yours help to keep these great talents alive. You know, I do sometimes wonder if, as time goes on, if culturally we're starting to forget these great entertainers.
Yeah, I don't think we'll ever forget Sellers, because when I was writing the book, I went down to the local cafe and a young lady came in and she turned with her back to me and a friend of mine who was there with the camera, luckily, and she had a massive pink panther on her coat. And I put that in the book, yeah. So the Pink Panther and Sellers are always with us.